And the number one issue facing workers and families is the housing crisis. It permeates every facet of Irish life. Young people left without hope, children growing up in emergency accommodation, businesses who can't get workers, schools who can't get teachers, guards, nurses, members of our defence forces leaving their profession because they can't find somewhere to live. And this should have been a budget to resolve the housing crisis, but today Minister McGrath and Minister Donoghue have failed in that regard. Hear, hear. Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil have caused the housing crisis, and today's budget is further confirmation that they are not the ones to fix it. We needed a budget for renters, instead we got a budget for landlords. A Sinn Féin government would have introduced a budget that would have got to grips with the housing crisis and built the homes that our people so desperately need. Access to healthcare, is one of the most fundamental needs of any citizen. Knowing that your child will be able to receive critical surgeries or mental health services when and if they need it. Having confidence that a loved one will be treated with dignity. But that's not the Ireland that we live in today. Instead, we have an Ireland where young and old are waiting hours upon hours to be admitted to our hospitals in emergency departments. An Ireland where many of them are consigned to trolleys on the hospital corridor. An Ireland where our children are forced to wait years for critical spinal surgery with devastating consequences. An Ireland where a child was forced to wait for 5 years, in which time her spine contorted by more than 90 degrees, leaving her in pain and sometimes unable to breathe. And any modern society will be judged on its ability to deliver on these very most basic needs. And has there ever been a point in the history of the state when a minister celebrates billions of additional euros in the state's coffers when so many children are condemned to homelessness or forced to wait for years for critical surgery? And the question I ask, is that the society we want to build? Because today's budget offers no more hope to these children than they had yesterday. It has failed them again. A budget is about setting out a path for the future. It's about setting a vision of our values, a vision and values that are about compassion, that are about dignity and respect. And this government and this budget needs to be judged on that basis. And on that basis, it has clearly failed. Becheartgur ken ashnish a beyond a horu a an year came tihiacte. A can you hipper and are McGrath is Donoghue. Gurbe Fianna Fáil agus Fine Gael but Kushlish and Gear came tihiacte agus Tessin your league na Yetson a level to and year came Shaw Rachel. Timidin are going in year in the new, and they will offer a skin sharp and quick beyond the Ashik fanart. So it's like Kiddo wear jig in our hospital, a giddy fanart for a shot in Yappa, agus yetic fanart in our Rana Egandala. The housing crisis is the government's greatest failure, and ending the housing crisis is Sinn Féin's #1 priority. Delivering the biggest public housing programme in the history of the state is Sinn Féin's #1 priority, and it needed to be the #1 priority of this budget. But under this government, entire generations have been locked out of home ownership. More than 2/3 of our young people are forced to live with their parents, and more of them are reaching the conclusion that their future is not here but elsewhere. Home ownership is falling under this government. House prices are rising, rents are spiralling out of control, and the level of homelessness has broken all new records month after month. And what an indictment on this government, which has billions of euros at its disposal, that nearly 4,000 children woke up this morning in emergency accommodation. And can any one of us here really imagine what that is like? A child not being able to invite a playmate over to their home because their home is a hotel room or a B&B. What it's like for a parent wondering what they have done wrong, that they are raising their children in these conditions. But they have done nothing wrong. It is the government who have wronged them, and shame on you for not changing course and setting a path to make things right in this budget. Because the reality is, you have normalised child homelessness, and that should never be accepted in this state. Is this the society we want to be? It is not. Ministers, you have been in government, as Minister Donoghue said, for just over 3 years now. But let's look at your record in relation to housing. Since taking office, the average rents have increased by 33%. What does that mean? It means the average renter is paying $5,000 more in rent every single year since you took office just over 3 years ago. Those who want to buy a house have seen the house prices increase since you took office 3 years ago by €60,000. God forbid you live in Wicklow, because it went up by €90,000 there, or €70,000 in Kildare. That's the record of your government. And the Minister for Housing has said that the government has turned a corner on the issue of housing. Well, what planet is he living on? Because he's certainly not living on this one. Is he in Gearchem Tíheachta and Chippus Mótig in Rialtas? Agus horu Sinn Féin túsete an Gearchem Tíheachta, Fyn Rialtas shot in the glunta dini, a bit na me chance aku agus tihe a yiel, no a kisu, agus Lerian and Canash na shaw, na will plan egin Rialtas fios a har or seal na dini. The government's abject failure to deliver affordable homes to buy and to reduce rents is crushing the living standards of ordinary people, and it's punishing those so desperate to build for the future. And the government and the minister over there has missed every single target that he has set on affordable housing. Every single one of them he has missed year after year since taking office. But what's more fundamental is that the plan that underpins this budget and the targets, even if they were reached, are doomed to fail. And we know that, and you know that, and everybody knows that. These targets are universally acknowledged as being too low. So what's the government done in its budget to respond to all of that today? You didn't increase the targets at all. Not one additional home are you planning to build of what you've already set out. Not one additional home. There's no ramp up in housing under this budget. Last year, in 2023, you allocated €2.6 billion to the capital housing programme. This year, you allocate the same amount of money. No increased investment, no increased urgency. It is in the middle of a housing crisis, Minister. It is shameful. You couldn't make this up, that you have decided not even to ramp up housing delivery before what you've planned.
Can't do it.
It is a clear message, if there ever was one, to workers and families that under this government, in terms of housing, things will not get better. Indeed, they will get worse. And Sinn Féin have pointed out a plan. We said very clearly what should have been in this budget is the biggest state-supported construction of social, affordable and cost rental houses in the history of the state, delivering 21,000 public homes next year. That is what's needed. That's the ambition. That's the scale of the crisis, but you've failed to meet that. Increasing the supply of affordable homes to rent and to buy. For many years, Sinn Féin have also called for the introduction of a refundable tax credit to put 1 month's rent back into renters' pockets, and for this to be introduced, crucially, alongside a 3-year ban on rent increases. For years, this proposal was criticised time and time again by government, by minister, and last year you performed an embarrassing U-turn and introduced a botched tax credit which more than half of renters have not even received. But even in rent pressure zones, rents are increasing more than the increase in the tax credit, and you know this. And if you live outside of the rent pressure zone, then God help you, because they're increasing it by multiples of that. So without a ban on rent increases, the Minister, you may as well have written the cheque yourself and stuffed it into the pockets of the landlords, because that is where it is going to end up. A direct transfer of money into the pockets of landlords. And they're not my words. They're the words of the minister sitting next to you. They're the words of Pascal Donoghue last year. You simply do not get it. If you don't freeze, if you do not ban rent increases, then what you're doing is transferring this money from the state into the pockets of landlords. But not content with writing one cheque for landlords, the government have decided to write them another one by giving them a tax break of €600 next year at a cost of €160 million. But you even go further than that, Minister. You increase this tax break for landlords year after year until it reaches €1,000 by 2027. How much is that going to cost? €270 million to landlords. You shake your head. The tax paper that you published shows the full year cost of this €160 million, Minister. You may be embarrassed that that's what you're doing, but let's call it for what it is. You've decided to put money, taxpayers' monies, into the pockets of landlords. And you couldn't make this up. You simply couldn't make this up. In this budget, this government has provided nearly twice as much to landlords as it has to struggling renters. Yeah. Now, you know fine well, because your experts in your department told you, that the vast majority of these landlords never ever thought about leaving the rental market. And this SOP to landlords will go down as one of the most stupidest tax reliefs ever to be provided by a Minister for Finance in recent times. It is shameful that what you're doing with public money in this regard. But don't take my word for it. Listen to what your experts have said in the Department of Finance. Your own department made it clear this summer that tax is not the reason why landlords choose to sell their properties. The tax strategy papers are published for us all to see. The department also warned that personal rates of income tax have always applied to rental income, and any favourable treatment to this income would raise legitimate questions around social equity. But we know what side you have. You're always on the side of the landlords. So it is for the government to explain. Why is it, Minister? It's a legitimate question. Why should a nurse be taxed more than a landlord? Because that's what you've done in your proposal today, and it's shameful. It is absolutely wrong, and the worst thing is it's not even going to work, and if you listen to your own department, they would have told you that. Today's budget is a grim news for renters and aspiring home buyers, but what is most shocking is that the government have announced a housing budget which they themselves know falls very far short of the needs of our people. This budget is a further confirmation, if ever we need it, and it's something that we have known for some time, that this government has given up on housing. It is clear that only a Sinn Féin government can deliver the type of change that we need, deliver the type of homes that our people need, and deliver the type of energy and determination to cut through the red tape that is needed to deliver and end the crisis that has been created by these two parties opposite. Yeah. For too long, under Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, our health service launched from crisis to crisis. Overcrowding in our hospitals is out of control, and waiting lists continue to go up. And our young doctors and nurses are looking abroad. And in this budget, you've given them no reason to stay at home and plenty of reasons to leave, because they can't afford a home. They can't provide the quality of care that they were trained to deliver because of the conditions in which they're forced to work in. And let's turn to the state of our hospitals. Over the recent period, the number of patients in accident and emergency departments has broken all records and represents a damning indictment of the government's lack of planning in respect of this crisis. It lacks urgency. It lacks prioritisation that has caused significant distress to many patients and to families. Now, Minister, they're not my words. They're the words of your party leader, Micheál Martin, in 2018. Well, what's happened since? Since you took office? Well, in January you broke new records. 931 patients languishing on trolleys in a single morning. And since then, the Minister for Health has set a new target that no more than 350 patients will languish in a trolley on any given day. Minister, a decade ago, 350 patients on trolleys in corridors in our hospitals was a national scandal. Today it is a government target. How shameful. That's the ambition that the government have. It is now a target. There are 710,000 people waiting just to get a date for a hospital appointment. 40,000 more of them since you took office 3.5 years ago. 250,000 people waiting for a diagnostic scan. And there are patients with cancer, children with scoliosis, older people with broken bones, and they're told to wait and wait again. And the same applies to children's mental health and children's disability services. Waiting lists for children have more than doubled since this government took office. More than 15,000 children are waiting for first contact with their specialist disability team. On the other end of the scale, we have 6,000 older people who have been approved for home help but have been left waiting with no help. And the same challenge are faced with people with disability. In every section of our society, from young to old, for people with disabilities to mental health issues, it is clear that our health service is going in the wrong direction. So what do we have in the budget, given all of those facts, given all of the fact that it is going in the wrong direction since this government took office? What has this budget done? It's done next to nothing. There is very little in this budget that will give any comfort to patients or parents who are struggling to get access to basic health and basic care services. No urgency. No vision, no compassion. And that's the reality. You've just decided to forget about health. You've failed time and time again to invest in the workforce and to plan for the future. And today the government boasts about record tax revenues. Yet you've delivered a standstill budget for health. There is no new funding for additional hospital beds. There's less capital investment than was promised in the National Development Plan for health. In fact, the health capital budget wouldn't even keep pace with inflation. It's real-time cuts that is actually happening to health service, which is a crying out for investment. And you have decided this at Cabinet in all consciousness, despite the resources that we have of the state, to actually leave the health system that is breaking at the seams as bad this year, as bad next year as it is this year. And indeed, it's probably going to be worse, because the real reality is you have underfunded for ELS. The standstill budget isn't even enough to keep pace with what is happening. And what does that tell us? It tells us that government have decided very clearly that they've thrown in the towel on health, that they don't have any vision, that they have nothing to offer anymore. They have nothing to offer in terms of proving the conditions faced by healthcare workers or indeed the patients, or indeed they have no interest. Ten service flinch ag fullenge fin realta seo, agus ní féidir le áthar leapacha in their hospital a eil, agus tá poisig fannar blianti le hé ábridí criticale, agus is only doctor agus altra a tag fuegal, agus is lír go bhfuil in realta seo tar éis idias and service flinch. For Sinn Féin, improving access to healthcare and reducing its costs is a key priority. And we've proposed a major investment in healthcare in terms of our plan, to roll out 1,800 additional beds over the next 3 years, to invest in modern diagnostic equipment and fit-for-purpose CAMS units that support children, their families, and treat them with dignity and with respect, and to reduce medical costs. And also extend medical cards to an additional 400,000 citizens and abolish prescription charges. You could have done that, but you've decided not to. Because the difference is we in Sinn Féin have an ambition. We have an ambition for our health service, and instead the government has thrown in the towel. You've given up on patients and you've given up on our healthcare staff. In the past year, more and more workers and families have struggled under the cost of living. The high cost of living has impacted every corner of our society, young and old. And those working hard to pay the rent or to make their monthly mortgage payment have felt it hard. Citizens with disability have felt it really hard, as have many others. Energy bills remain too high. Food prices and fuel costs have shot up. And instead of moving forward, far too many people believe that they're moving backwards. Le brisig is bliananis ta ebrani agus chaili fullenge the work hostas moraltala. An anion and rud carta yena de pain agus the chaili ten realtas igligan shisiat. In the past year, Minister, you know that mortgage costs have soared. According to the Central Bank, 2 out of every 5 households will have seen their annual mortgage costs increase by more than €3,000. 1 in 5 households will have seen their mortgage costs increase by a staggering €5,700. And mortgage prisoners who have had their loans sold to vulture funds, sales that both ministers opposite me actually facilitated, have felt it really, really hard, as they have seen letter after letter fall through the letterbox, one after another, telling them that another punishing interest rate hike is on the way. And for months now, Sinn Féin have put forward a clear plan to help workers and families with the soaring cost of mortgage costs, with temporary and target mortgage interest relief. And for months, the government opposed it over and over again at every single turn, including the Minister for Finance. You opposed it right up until recently. You who yourself argued for 100% mortgage interest relief, didn't you? 100% mortgage interest relief. You're Minister for Finance today, and you provide 20%. And at the time you were arguing for 100% mortgage interest relief in 2016, the ECB's interest rate was 0. It's never been the highest in the history of the state. And you've dithered and dathered and you've delayed. And even now, after the announcement, we find out that people won't even be able to benefit from this till 2024. But instead of implementing the plan that we put forward for many, many months now, the government decided to implement a scheme which appears to lock out tens of thousands of households who've seen their mortgage costs go through the roof. And there's no rationale why you would do this, Minister. None whatsoever. Like the idea that you were scrambling at the last minute, trying to put a plan together of how to do this is just ridiculous. We've been raising this since December of last year. You've had plenty of time to design this measure, and you've decided consciously to lock out tens of thousands of people who've seen their mortgage interest rate rise. Mortgage interest relief that this government has proposed will not be available to households who have an outstanding mortgage balance beneath €80,000. Do you know that somebody like on €75,000, if they've been on a tracker rate or if they're with the vultures, that they will have seen their interest rate increase by nearly €2,000 in the last year, and you're deciding to do nothing for them? Some of these individuals are older people. They've started to pay down their mortgage. And you've decided to lock them out. There is no rationale whatsoever to do this. So what do you say to the person who's looking in today, who've seen their interest rates increase on 10 separate occasions since July of last year? They're paying €2,000 more than they were last year, but because their outstanding loan is less than €80,000, the Minister for Finance, the Minister for Public Expenditure and the government have basically saying you're on your own. We're not supporting you. That's shameful. It's absolutely shameful and has to be dealt with in the finance bill. And again, it's a testament of how this government takes a good idea from Sinn Féin and decides to make a mess of it. What you should do, and what we've told you since last year, is you should provide mortgage interest relief up to €1,500, absorbing 30% of the interest that has been increased since last year, and that should be available to everybody who have seen their interest rates increase. There's a way of doing it. Let's not mess it up. Let's not try and be different just because we came up with the idea. You've made the U-turn, you've acknowledged that we're right, and let's now get this policy right and support individuals. Workers and families continue to spend too much on heating their homes and keeping the lights on. And in the past several months, wholesale prices have fallen sharply. And while electricity prices for households have fallen across Europe, Irish electricity prices remain unacceptably high, and Sinn Féin has been clear. In government, we would provide the power to the energy regulator to stamp out anti-competitive behaviour and regulated standing charges. And we would force the hand of energy companies by setting a price cap above which they could not charge consumers, reducing energy bills for households at a time of crisis. In March, the Taoiseach promised to take action against energy companies that failed to pass on reduced costs to struggling households. No action was taken. Instead, the government have allowed energy companies to continue to fleece households with unaffordable bills. Sinn Féin put the high cost of childcare on the political agenda back in the election of 2020. We did it by committing to cut childcare fees by 2/3. But what the government has announced today is that too little, too late. It's a 25% reduction, but people will not get it until September of next year. People need to see reductions now, and there should be no delay until September. We need to see these bills coming down from January, and I would urge the government to actually again heed Sinn Féin's call and to reduce these costs by 2/3 in total, 55% next year, as we have planned. Even before the spike in energy prices and inflation, more and more workers' hard-earned money was being spent on extortionate childcare fees, rents and energy bills. And we are one of the most expensive places to live in Europe for some time. In recent years, half of all households have seen their incomes fall or stagnate, and despite doing everything right and working hard, the economy hasn't been working for them. We in Sinn Féin have said for some time that the fairest way to reduce taxes and put money back into workers' pockets is through cuts to the USC, and this budget needed to deliver a fair tax package. In 2020, we stated our intention to remove the first €30,000 that a worker earns from the USC tax net, and we will deliver on that if we get an opportunity in government. The road that could have been started today is that road, by abolishing the first rate of USC, by slashing the second rate of USC in half and increasing the point at which the third rate of USC is applied. That is what Sinn Féin has proposed. Instead, what we have is what the government have announced, and the most expensive element of today's tax package is a €2,000 increase in the standard rate band, which well over half of workers will not benefit from. The package will see a worker earning €35,000 benefit from €320, while someone on €200,000 will benefit from €890, and that isn't a fair tax package in anybody's books. We also know that the rise in fuel prices has added further financial strain to households across the state. In September, the government increased the price of petrol and diesel with the tax hike, and tomorrow, at midnight tonight, you will push ahead with another tax hike, pushing up the price of petrol further. We will place an amendment later on tonight to try and stop that price hike going ahead. Because, Minister, where I come from, and I think this is what the government fails to understand, that in many parts of Ireland, driving a car is not a luxury. Driving a car is a necessity. It is how you get your kids to school. It is how you travel to work. It is how you make your way to the hospital appointment, because rural transport or affordable or accessible public transport doesn't exist in many of these communities. Yet the government are hell-bent to continue to increase the price of petrol and diesel through further increases in carbon taxes at midnight tonight and again next year. Again, not content with that, you will again increase other fuel, as we see in this budget. In May of next year, you're going to increase the cost of home heating oil, where more than a third of households rely on that heat to heat their homes. But, Minister, the first test of a republic is how we protect the most vulnerable. And the decision to increase payments for citizens with disabilities by only €12, given the high cost of disability, which everyone seems to recognise apart from the government, is unacceptable. What should have been provided and what Sinn Féin would have provided is a €20 weekly increase in the rate of disability-related payments. The qualified child payment to the Pearse children will be increased by only €4 per week. Sinn Féin would have increased it by €5 for the under-12s and €10 for the over-12s. But you also failed to increase child benefit, Minister. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have both cut child benefit in the past. And to this very day, child benefit payment remains less than what it was in 2008. So the government are neglecting children, and child poverty will deepen as a result. Our economy has faced significant headwinds in recent years, from the pandemic to an energy shock. In the past year, we faced emerging and interrelated headwinds, high levels of inflation and a tightening monetary policy. And these challenges have placed significant pressure on households and businesses. Rising interest rates pose a risk to future investment and infrastructure delivery, and most crucially in the areas of housing, and that will require a greater state response. The growing threat of climate breakdown and our duty to transition to a low-carbon economy poses challenges and opportunities to our society and the wider economy. But despite all the rhetoric, the government is failing on climate action. At the beginning of this year, we had the highest rate in greenhouse gas emissions in the EU. And under this government, our emissions are increasing. And this is a perfect example of all the government bluster, all talk but no action. And what's been announced today? To provide alternatives to households? Well, we have a meagre increase in the budget for residential and community retrofits, and we will remain with a retrofitting scheme that is only available to you if you have €25,000 lying about in a bank account which you can afford to spend, locking out low and middle income households from support where they are hit with further carbon tax hikes. So we can do much better, and Sinn Féin outlined how we can do better in terms of climate. We have proposed an additional €500 million to expand retrofitting, making it accessible to low and middle income households, to reduce transport costs and accelerate our transition to renewable energy. Today, the government announced an increase in the research and development tax credit, and I welcome that, because for Sinn Féin, we've been calling for this for years, for the R&D tax credit to be increased to 30%, to simplify the application process and support SMEs, and to provide tax credits to Irish start-ups in the one instalment in the first year, to drive innovation among Irish start-ups and firms. Next year, the domestic economy is expected to grow by 2%. The ultimate task is to convert economic gains into increasing living standards for our people. For too many, the government is failing that task. Tax revenues has grown and will continue to grow over the next year. A key driver of revenue growth in recent years has been due to corporation tax, and we know a significant amount of this revenue is highly concentrated and comes from a small number of foreign-owned multinationals. And as such, a future course of this revenue is uncertain. Next year will also see the implementation of the OECD tax agreement for the digital age, which Sinn Féin supports, and we will scrutinise the legislation underpinning this agreement in the coming weeks. Today, the government have stated their intention to create two separate funds, and Sinn Féin supports the principle of establishing a fund to increase and support public investment in the years ahead. But while it's important to keep an eye on the future challenges, we can't lose sight of the problems our people and our economy face here and now. As the tax take of the state bulges, with surpluses worth billions of euros in the years ahead, we have a unique opportunity to tackle the housing crisis and the infrastructure deficits that harm living standards and that undermine our economy. And this budget was a squandered opportunity in that regard. Tesla mo machantar hain and gear kim sa gaeltar, don darid daina ruinish as a kila to lina gancheri luhiwal tarish chichim, agus niel a chaila awareness and quicker togal clonitri gaelic. A Cawalin scheme Lord na Gaelic Yal and Tara O'Donovan. Cawalin Muni Brisha Hastin do Udres na Gaeltarte. O Planal Changa Gajin the Kalashi Sauri at a Gruaches a Gashriha Fagate and Reti eg Taresh Iriaso via Vilis Arjagon. Nirilish and Realta Shaw few is quick million Brisha or her foiled a draw na Gaelic, a Gazi Jerry or Schemen to Muit and Gaeltart. Horushin Fain 2 million brisje, 1 million jeeg brisje sa budget malarte don gaelchart a wain, 1 million brisje don gaelic, agus 1 million in sin do TG Car, mar gwyl mar hasiart doon. This budget needed to make life more affordable for our people. It needed to reduce the cost of living. It needed to accelerate the delivery of affordable homes, to tackle overcrowding and unacceptable waiting lists in our health service, to use this opportunity to deliver lasting change and better living standards for our people. In the time to come, this budget will be remembered as one which wasted that opportunity. It bears the hallmarks of a government that is out of touch, out of ideas and out of time.